Hey, I'm T.A. Charlie, and welcome to The Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic. Homeroom is on Rumble. You just go to Rumble and search channels for The Road to Concord. It's one word. When you find it, you go ahead and you click follow. It might mean you got to set up an account, but it's fast, it's easy, it's free. I did it, you can do it. For those technologically challenged members of the class, you can also catch us on Facebook and YouTube. After the show, it's uploaded to Podbean, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and BitChute. Just look for The Road to Concord. You can go to the blog page, that's theroadtoconcord.com. That's where you'll find all your show notes, study notes, and handouts for the class. The phone is working. If you don't know how to call in, email us and we'll think about it. Finally, you can email a professor at joe@theroadtoconcord.com. He's a little slow, but he'll eventually get around to emailing you back. This show is currently mainly listener-sponsored. If you are interested in advertising your business on the show, please email us. With that said, we ask for your participation on a value-for-value basis. If you find our show of value to you, then you provide an equivalent portion of your labor and treasure through the donate link on the Road to Concord blog page, the show description on Rumble, and in the comments on the other streams. And thank you to all of you who have and will support this show.
Good morning. Welcome to the Road to Concord. Today is Thursday, January 29th, 2026. I'm your host, Joe Bakanovic. This is going to be the second class in a series that we're doing. It's a sort of a book study of a sort. It's The Bible Amongst the Myths by John N. Oswalt. Is it a unique revelation or just ancient literature? This little puppy right here. But this is not so much a Bible study. I'm using this book to look at some things in a philosophical sense and explaining how it, I'm going to point out as I go through the book how it explains the two different worldviews that we see in our world today. It's very useful for explaining the world as we see it and encounter it and the different type of mindsets. So that's what caught my attention when I was reading it, and that's why I wanted to do it as a book study here. Very valuable to me. So we're going to be doing some philosophy here as we go through this. And Mr. Oswalt, although he doesn't tell you this, is doing the same thing. Today is chapter 2, The Bible and Myth, a Problem of Definition. So we'll just begin. We'll see how long we want to go today, how long my voice holds out. Some of these chapters are rather lengthy, and I don't know that we'll get them done in a 1 hour class. A shift in understanding. Mr. Oswalt begins, the first question we must answer is whether the Bible does indeed have a distinctive view of reality. Is it different from the ancients? 50 years ago, there would have been little debate on this issue. This is one of the reasons that I believe this book was written, I think published in 2009, if I remember correctly. This is important because I'm looking at this with a whole Bible worldview. Yeah, 2009. So 50 years prior to that, it's going to put him shortly before 1960s, when we kicked Yahweh out of the public square, when I think that the pit was open and the fallen angels and the demons and everything were loosed to fool the nations. This is one of these reflections of this. You fool the nations, you no longer believe that the Bible has a different worldview. So I'm seeing fireflies and connections as I read this book. One of the reasons I wanted to share it with you. So he says 50 years ago, there would have been little debate on the issue. Scholars in both the Old and New Testament studies would have agreed with Harvard professor G. Ernst Wright when he said the God of Israel has no mythology. And he gives you the source for that. He quote cites everything he uses in his book, in the back of the book. So G. Stalling, writing in the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, concluded that myth was not a useful category for biblical interpretation. And then he gives you the citation there. Likewise, Arthur Weiser would say that the monotheism of the Bible and its connection with history do not allow myth-making. To be sure, none of these writers or many others who would have agreed with them on this point would have argued that all the narratives in the Bible were historically accurate. Neither would they have argued that it was impossible for the biblical accounts, especially those in the Old Testament, to have had their origins in some sort of mythical perceptions. They were simply saying that the biblical literature, as it now stands, does not share the dominant characteristics of myth. Today, I agree. Today, however, opinions have radically changed. Robert A. Oden claims that there is a real possibility that mythical thought and mythical literature are at the very heart of Israel's religion, almost as direct in the statement of Mark Smith, who says the Baal cycle expresses the heart of the West Semitic religion from which Israelite religion largely developed. He's claiming that the Bible is just an evolution of Baal worship. Not if you read the Bible, it isn't. Anyhow, Oswald continues, and J.W. Rogerson says that a study of myth may yield insights that will assist biblical interpretation. What accounts for such a radical shift? To a significant degree, it has to do with the discovery of new data, but with the shift in the prevailing assumptions of scholars. It is not new data. It has nothing to do with new data, is what he's saying. It's a shift in mindset. This is another one of the reasons I think what we're seeing, I've told you, if you're going to stick with me through this study, get used to this. This is going to happen throughout this study. This is why I'm doing it. This is not so much a Bible study as it is a theological philosophy examination using the book as a springboard. So, what's going on here? We don't have a lot of new information that would account for this change in opinion within scholastic studies of the Bible. What we have is a change of opinion amongst scholars. Now, what's the big deal there? That's exactly what I would expect if the pit has been opened and the demonic forces of Satan have been loosed to fool the nations once again. They're going to come out and they're going to put scales over the average person's eyes, and they will cease to see the truth, and they'll start believing the lie. This is Romans 1, and Oswald's going to quote Romans 1 throughout this book. He'll repeatedly fall back to it. They're going to believe the lie rather than the truth. They're going to look only to the creation rather than the creator. And that's a change in perception, and it's a choice. You choose to look that way. So even if you weren't necessarily a biblical believer before, say, the 1940s, 1950s, somewhere in that area is when this really started to change, you wouldn't come out and directly oppose the biblical worldview because it was accepted by everybody in the Western world. That would be like you stayed in the closet so that you weren't, hammered by public opinion. Okay, so in a lot of ways, we can compare the way a non-believer would have stayed quiet to the way, it used to be if you were homosexual. That's where the phrase comes, stays in the closet, so that you don't suffer the ramifications of public ostracization. And, a lot of people will say, well, that's the evil thing there, Joe. Well, yes and no. We're not going to chase that rabbit right now. That's for another day. I mean, I'd love to chase that one. The sociologist in me is like, let's have a look at that. But what we're looking at now is the normalization in our world today. We are seeing an increasing normalization of pagan beliefs. Okay. And that's where this book is going to take us, into what he calls neo-paganism. And that is exactly what the Bible would tell us we're looking for. As we get closer to the return of the Messiah, we are going to expect to see this. This is what yesterday's show was all about. So what I'm seeing in reading Oswald's book is I'm like, you're explaining the philosophy behind the mentality that leads to what I'm seeing in the world today. It was told to me by the Bible that this was going to happen. Oswald's given me the philosophical conceptual worldview behind this. And then the other book that we probably won't study, but I'll post for 1 or 2 by Peter Jones. He goes ahead and he gives us the real world examples that result from the worldview Oswald's explaining in the book we're currently studying. So hopefully this is all making sense, and you're understanding, or you'll get some understanding at least, of where I'm going and why I'm going there. So essentially it's a shift in perspective in the way people choose to read and evaluate the Bible. It's a choice. It's a choice. It's a rejection of the way the world saw it before. It is an open rejection and a choice to go a different direction. That's the apostasy that Paul was talking about in 2 Thessalonians 2. All right. So what accounts for such a radical shift? To a significant degree, it has to do not with the discovery of new data, but with the shift in prevailing assumptions of scholars. For the period of time between about 1865 and 1925, the dominant mood of Old Testament scholars was that the Old Testament was simply a child of its times, and the Old Testament thought and religion had merely evolved out of the general religious milieu of the ancient Near East. To be sure, it was the final and decisive step, leaving its predecessors far behind, but it was still the results of an evolutionary process in which humanity discovered more and more clearly the truth about deity. All right. What he's telling you is scholarship precedes society. So it takes about 100 years before the things the scholars start talking about, before it actually happens in society. So if I go back to John Dewey and the public education, about 100. Yep, that works. I see it. I see the patterns. If you haven't been with us for a long time, John Dewey, father of the American public education system, he started in the 1920s with Woodrow Wilson. About 100 years later, look what we have in public education right now. A bunch of idiots coming out of these schools. They're well programmed, but they can't think. What he's telling us is somewhere around 1865, scholars start thinking, well, the Bible's just myth. 100 years later, 1965, we kick God out of the public square saying we've killed God. There's a lag between when education starts pushing something and then when it gets into society, about 100-year lag. And that is a pattern that I recognized in sociology class. So again, his book is just setting off fireflies, and I'm going to stop and talk about it as we go through this. So we'll probably be at this study for a while on Thursday until we get through this book. It's too valuable. Okay. Oswald continues. But through the 1920s and the 1930s, there came to be a greater and greater dissatisfaction with this description of facts. Many scholars have pointed to the horrors of World War I as a cause for questioning whether the evolution of thought was necessarily always upward. It began to argue that new thought, unconditioned by its predecessors, that is, revelation, was a real possibility. In the field of systematic theology, the Swiss theologian Karl Barth spoke out strongly in favor of the idea that biblical thought could not be explained in evolutionary terms. Thus, in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, there appeared a number of works in the biblical field in which, while influenced from the surrounding cultures was not denied, there was strong arguments for the ultimate uniqueness of the biblical religion. The title of Wright's book, The Old Testament Against Its Environment, aptly expresses the moods of these times. Now, again, we got to stop. Let me explain to you what's going on in the background here. Folks, do me a favor. I don't want to harm those of you who come here to learn, to really learn. If what I'm doing here is just not going to mesh with you, don't just go away and ignore me. Send me an email or type a text or whatever, but let us know that this is just not going to work for you. Let me know that you are very upset with what I'm doing, that it's just not useful to you. What I'm doing here, what I plan on doing with this book is very, very different than anything you've seen me do. I'm doing philosophy for you, but I'm connecting dots in the process of all the different things I'm aware of. And I'm trying to help you your picture, focus. I don't know of another way to or a better way to do it than this. Okay. I don't know of a better way. That's why I chose this book. It is an absolutely tailor-made springboard for what it is I want to do. So where am I going at with this right now? Okay. In the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So you had 100 years where people were saying, oh, the Bible is just the evolution of myth in the ancient Near East. Well, then a few years after that, a few decades after that, you start getting this pushback, and you start within the scholars thinking of the universities and all this, like, no. The Bible's actually revelation. So it's an absolute leap in thinking. It's like the 6,000 year leap, for political theology. So this is just absolutely revolutionary in the ancient Near East world. Why is that important? Folks, this is biblical. This is prophecy. Oswald's not pointing it out. He may not even see it, but he's describing prophecy. 1940s, 50s, and 60s, that's the culmination of a period of thinking that had been going on since about the 1865 as well. It's the restoration of getting back to the Bible on its terms. This is Daniel. People will run to and fro and knowledge will increase. You're not running to and fro across the world. You're running to and fro through the scriptures. Daniel could care less about whether or not we're traveling on planes and using computers to communicate. That is not what he meant by knowledge. He meant knowledge of the word, of the Torah. And that's what the 40s and 50s and 60s is going to start being. It's going to be a pushback, and it's going to be a return to the way. So when we look, we see this struggle between good and evil in our world, in the acts and thinking and words and policies of mankind. Oswald is explaining this, but he's focused on the philosophical foundations behind all this. I'm trying to help read his book to you, but help you see the bridge that I'm making here. I'm reading his book and I'm like, that explains what I'm seeing in the world. Well, that's biblical. The Bible told us this would happen. From the beginning, it told us this would happen. So for me, it's like, how could it be a myth if everything it tells me I see when I look for it, when I know how to look for it, when I understand what the Bible is telling me in its context? Boom, right there in front of me. How do I deny that? Okay, a lot of people won't even stop to look at these things. They don't see them. They don't think about them. I can't not see this stuff. When I was reading this book, it just boom, right in my face. I don't know how I missed this the first time. I wasn't meant to yet. Okay, I was blinded the first time around. And what's really interesting is if you follow behind me in any of the books that I really like, I mean, they're just painted yellow, brothers and sisters, with my highlighter. Well, this is the book I read the first time. I highlighted all the stuff that's hitting me, and I saw it. But I didn't make the connections yet because I was missing pieces. So today I can go back and we'll read the book, and I can explain and fill these pieces in for you as we go. If you were to read the book without... Charlie, you got a minute? Pop on here for me, would you? I asked you to read this book. Had you never known me and you had picked this book up and read it, you'd have got something out of it. I don't doubt that. Would you have gotten as much out of it without the 4 years?
I would have never gone where you've gone with this.
But it's not me. It's not me. It's
not you. It's
I'm the one that's holding the additional information that I fill in.
Right. When, like you say, when you first explained the two worldviews and how that, I'm like, okay, that kind of but then as he started to explain it and, with his definitions and such like that, I saw the same thing you did when everything was coming together. I was starting to associate this with real life and what was going on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this just fits right into place, and it explains everything. So it's
all right.
Yeah.
But if I had not taught you logic, the basics of logic before you,
I would have never got there. No.
Yeah.
It's everything. It's everything that we've covered over the last
4 years or so.
4 years, whatever
years
we've been doing this show. Yeah. I mean, putting all that together, this is kind of a capstone thesis, if you will, of what we've been doing.
And it's going hand in hand with the Genesis study.
And that's what even is more amazing to me, is the way all these things are coming together. It's like a snowball running down the hill. We started with this little teeny ball, and now we're at the end of the hill, and it's turning into an avalanche.
We primed you with Dr. Heiser's Unseen Realms so that you start thinking like an ancient Hebrew in spiritual sense. Then we agreed to do Genesis 1, which you had. If you're not studying Alan and the Scepter and the Birthright with Genesis 1, you're not. Alan's Scepter and the Birthright comes straight out of Genesis. It comes straight out of the books of Genesis. So that preps you for looking at things spiritually. We're going to start a study of Genesis while we're doing this book with Oswald about the Bible is not a myth, folks. It's giving you these two worldviews. If you're looking with spiritual eyes, this is the hand of providence. We did not plan this, and it all came together in January of 2026. And we're going to stay right where we're at until we finish this. If it's the last thing we do, we will finish these concurrent parallel studies.
And it may very well be the last things we're able to do.
Yeah, because you know what? We'll be wrapping up right about the time of the fall feasts, but don't go there yet.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll continue. I know it's a rabbit. Like I told you, get ready for these. So it's going to happen. Okay, that's the whole purpose of this study. Cool. It's only 18 minutes after. Oswald says, but by the 1960s, that mood was already beginning to change. Fundamental to this change was the recognition that there was a contradiction inherent in the thinking of Barth and those who followed him. On the one hand, they stressed strongly the idea that the Bible was unique from all of its surrounding cultures in its use of human historical experience as the locus of revelation. But on the other hand, they admitted the correctness of the prevailing scholarly opinion that historical records contained in the Bible was largely incorrect. Okay, I'm going to differ with these modern day scholars. Younger scholars such as James Barr and Brevard Childs pointed out the inconsistency in this thinking. If the historical basis on which the supposed revelation rests was false, then why should we give any special credence to the ideas resting on this basis? Now, you're like, Joe, I don't want to know about these names. I don't care about what they're doing. Yes, you do. These people are in seminary schools. They're the teachers in the seminary schools. They're the movers and shakers behind what's being taught in the seminary schools. And your pastors and teachers come directly out of these seminary schools. This does affect you, okay? The fact that we're like, well, I don't care what the teachers are teaching as long as they're teaching my kids. And then your kid graduates. Why can't Johnny read, but he knows all about climate control and the LGBTQ rainbow jihad? Because you weren't paying attention to the teachers. Because you weren't doing your job. Well, Oswald's giving us a little insight in what's going on behind this thinking with biblical studies in the seminary schools. This is important if you're a believer. So, Oswald continues. Thus began a sweeping shift away from any idea that the biblical thought was unique either in its origins or in its ultimate formulations. Now, if you start thinking the Bible is no longer unique, it's no longer the word of the transcendent creator. He says, so if it was appropriate to describe other religious systems as myth, there could be no reason to exclude the biblical religion from that terminology. In other words, I'm going to teach the Bible as just another myth, another pagan myth. You are deifying Yahweh. You're saying he's not a God, he's just a story. It must be said that there have been no major new discoveries either in the realm of myth or in the ancient Near East that have caused this shift. To be sure, there continues to be an appeal to the ancient Near Eastern data we have, and there has been a great broadening of the definition of the term myth to make it possible to include the Bible in the category. But it is a change of assumptions that accounts for the shift, not new discoveries. Okay, two things. Change of assumptions, change of worldview, change of seeing things. So the people who are now wanting to argue that the Bible is a myth are no longer seeing with spiritual eyes. They are under a great delusion. They cannot see the truth. So they'll start looking for a way to make the Bible fit into the definition of myth. What's the easiest way to do this? Redefine the term myth. So I stretch the definition of myth. It's like they're not criminals, they're undocumented immigrants. Undocumented immigrants, i.e. illegal alien, i.e. criminal by definition. But we just changed the definition. They're no longer illegal aliens, they're undocumented immigrants. So this isn't a direct comparison, but you change the definition. And now all of a sudden, they're just good American citizens like all the rest of us looking for a better life. How can you argue with that? It's a form of equivocation. When you, in this case, instead of just changing the word, the term, they changed the definition. I've told you about how this works. The spirit behind these people who are redefining myth is the exact same one that back in 2016 through 2020, when they changed the definition of fascism. And that young man was on YouTube and he caught them doing it live. He recorded it when Webster's Dictionary live changed and updated the definition of fascism so that they could apply it to Donald Trump. They changed that definition specifically so it would point to and apply to Donald Trump. If you go back to a dictionary or an encyclopedia and you look at the definition of fascism before 2020, it didn't fit. It was totally different than it is now. That's what Oswald's pointing out, is they're changing the definition of myth specifically so that they can justify putting the Bible into myth. Therefore, they can now proselytize other non-believers and saying, no, there's nothing different about your Bible. So that's the point here that he's trying to get us to see. He continues, is it appropriate to classify the Bible as myth? Charlie, keep an eye on the time for me, please. How can we adjudicate this difference of opinion? Is it appropriate to call the Bible myth or not? Surely that depends on the definition of the term myth. It depends on what you mean, what the definition of is. That when Clinton said that, he told you that he is the spiritual child of continuous thinking. He's a pagan. That's what he was telling you. I'm a pagan. Because you're arguing over what the definition of is. Okay, same thing here. Furthermore, it is important to understand why there is such a desire at the present time to force the Bible into that category. Odin says that the assumption that all things biblical must be forever distinguished from the non-biblical and especially the mythological world is the only basis for the otherwise inexplicable desire to divide the Old Testament from myth. So what he's saying here is Odin's going to argue that the Bible has to be forever different than the myths. And he says there's no other reason given the data they have that would explain that. So he says, Oswald says, however, we might ask Odin the contrary question. Whence comes the great desire to break down that division? In other words, why do you want to break down that division? Why do you want to do away with saying that the Bible does not fit myth? Why do you want to put the Bible back under the category of myth? Well, I know the answer to that. If the Bible stays outside of myth, it's true. And that has great ramifications for every human being on the planet. But if I could put Bible back under the idea of myth, then I can ignore it. It doesn't change the reality, boys and girls. It changes whether or not you can make yourself comfortable with living in open, rebellious sin in this world. Now, there'll be a price to be paid for that in the future. But the people who are going to embrace this world and this world only are rejecting the afterlife. And they're saying, you cannot control me, and there are no limits on what I can do. I am a God unto myself. That Bible is just a myth. I don't have to listen to it. That's what they're doing. So in a sense, Odin, this gentleman here that Oswald's talking to us about, he's anti-Christ. He's other Christ, other than what the Bible says. He's he's a negation of the Bible. Remember, the Bible is the word of Yahweh made flesh. The Christ is the word of Yahweh made flesh. So the Bible is the Messiah before he was turned into a man, and vice versa. That's what the Bible says. Well, that's got to be a myth, Joe. Let's test that. So Oswald continues. In fact, it may be argued that the broadening of the definition that has occurred in recent years has been precisely in order to facilitate the breaking down of the division. In other words, to fool other students of theology into believing that the Bible is no different than any other myth from the ancient Near East. So this is where we're going to really get into some fun times. I'm going to stop right here, and we'll pick this up when we come back after the break. Let me ask the board real quick while we've got a moment or two before the bottom of the hour break. Are you understanding what I'm trying to say as I go through this? Am I being coherent? Am I making sense? I don't mean do you understand everything I'm saying, but are you tracking with me, or am I just talking into the void right now? I really could use that feedback. Natasha, pop on here. Come on.
Oopie?
Are you tracking with me?
Yes.
Okay. You're telling me the truth, aren't you? I heard that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's
Well, I actually wanted to make sure I wasn't just saying yes and being like, okay, am I
Right.
really? Yeah, okay, I think I am.
I'm not implying that there's anything cognitively wrong with Natasha. I can't ask Charlie this question because it's cheating. Charlie and I have read the book and he and I have been talking about it. So Charlie is not a neutral commentator on this. Natasha has overheard a few conversations about it in the pre-show, but she hasn't really been in it as much. So to me, she's just a more neutral outside observer to what I'm trying to do. And that's why I asked her. She's more reliable in this sense than Charlie would have been. Thank you, Natasha. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Spike says he's following along all right. So hopefully we're doing good with this. And by the time we get done with this study, you'll see why it's just so exciting to me and so important to me. And yes, I'm well aware I am firmly in both philosopher and sociology geek nirvana right now. I got that. I'm trying to help make sure I explain why I'm geeking out over this book so that you can track with it in a way that's going to be useful to you as you live your daily life. Mr. Quest says he's tracking it exactly where our society seems to currently be as bingo. That's it right there. Yes. Excellent. That's it. This has got so much explanatory value for our society. The stuff I don't know, follow will come with time. Yes, Deltros. Yep. And then Mr. Quest's comment. All right. Excellent. Good. I just needed y'all to let me know that that I'm hitting the target I'm aiming at. That's important to me. Okay. It does no good for me to try and teach if I'm not hitting the target. So let's take a bottom of the hour break. And when we come back, we'll pick up with where we left off. See you in 3. All right, we're back. I was looking ahead. We're woohoo! We're going to be quite a while getting through all of this as we go on this book study. So let's just get in it, because I don't know if we're going to want to go more than an hour today or not. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's pick up where Oswald left off. The problem of definition. And oh boy, is the philosopher in me going to geek out right here, because he is in my wheelhouse right now, brothers and sisters. He's going to preach too. So this brings us to one of the thorniest problems in this entire undertaking. He means his book. What is a myth? Rogerson goes so far as to say that there are so many differences of opinion on the subject that no one definition is possible. But if that is true, then no more discussion is possible. Each person will define the term as he or she wishes, and no basis for meaningful conversation remains. Oh boy, that right there. Let's stop. Your truth is not my truth. What's right for you might not be right for me, etc., etc. I'm just going to redefine everything to suit my desires at the time. Well, you can't change the essence of something just by redefining it. Sure can if I'm my own God. And there you go, boys and girls. The people who will not, everybody, at any point in time, if you will not accept the definition that has been established for a word, the concept that is behind that word, if you will not accept it, you are saying you are a God. Unless you do what Oswald's about to do. Make an argument for your proposal of the definition. So if I want to change, add, expound upon a definition, I need to make an argument for it so that I can look at your argument and decide whether or not you have made your case for what in this case, what is the definition of myth? The proper definition. Now, I've done this with y'all before. You just didn't realize what I was doing. And I know you didn't. I'm not saying you're stupid. You didn't realize what I was doing because I was channeling the Greek philosophers. They good googly moogly do they spend a lot of time on how to define something. I boiled it down for you in a very simple way. The idea of cat. Is it a tiger? Is it a jaguar? Is it a lion? Is it a lynx? Is it a bobcat? Is it a house cat? If it's a house cat, are we talking tabby? Are we talking Siamese? Are we talking mutt, calico? What do you mean by cat, Joe? Well, all of that is cat. Well, what is the essence that makes them all cat? The size difference is huge. What they eat is different. How they sound is different. How they even move sometimes is different. They have different characters. Okay? A jaguar is fearless. It's just not afraid of men. Tigers eat men. So those two cats are not afraid of man. But the only time that a puma or a cougar is going to give you trouble is when they're sick and starving to death. And a bobcat's really not going to give you any trouble unless they're sick, rabies or something, or you corner it. So how is it that even though they behave different, they look different, they act different, they're all still cat? What makes it a cat? That's not a nothing burger. And if somebody says, well, that doesn't matter, the idea of cat is so big a difference that cat can mean one thing for you and another for me, what Oswald's just pointing out is we can no longer talk. Because you're going to use language, I'm going to use language, and neither one of us knows what the other is saying. We're going to act like we do, but we don't. And that leads to babble. And that's the biblical point here. If you will not stick to known, understood, common definitions of the words you use, you might as well be speaking in a different language. Because you are. And this is why progressives can talk to you right out in the open using English and you do not understand what they're saying. If you've been with me for 3, 4, 5 years, 4 years now going on, that we've been doing this show, by now, hopefully I've proven to you, I am fluent in progressivese. So when I translate a progressive for you and you say, that's not what he said, Joe, you better stop and check yourself before you wreck yourself, because you're probably going to find out that's exactly what the progressive said. How do I know? I read their literature. I've learned their language. I've brought the receipts to you. If you follow behind me, you'll figure it out. You'll see that I'm not making these things up. This is at the heart of what Oswald's going to try and explain to us, that This is what's going on with the idea that the Bible is a myth. So he continues. So each person will define the term as he or she wishes, and no basis for meaningful conversation remains. Boy, do we have that in our country right now. This sounds much like a situation where the rules of logic no longer exist. This is why you can't reason with your leftist friends, brothers and sisters. A world in which the single standard of either the Bible or Greek logic have been dispensed with. He just said there's Bible language. Yes, there is. And the rules of Greek logic will apply to the Bible once you accept the biblical assertions. We're going to cover that next Tuesday. Oswald says, but that is a counsel of despair that we need not follow. We can at least make a case that myth is A and not B on the basis of the evidence. He's starting to show you that he knows logic, A and not B. That's actually a logical notation. This is like I said, he's in my wheelhouse. He's just trying to keep this accessible to people who have not gone through logic school. We may be charged with the misuse of the evidence, or with overlooking some important piece of evidence, or with some other logical fault, but we will not agree that a word can mean whatever someone chooses to make it mean. I agree. We refuse to do that. That word means what the definition says it means. If you want to change the definition, you must present an argument to do so. He will be defining myth by what you are now being set up for. What's going to follow is an informal logical proof of his definition of myth. And he'll be in it for the next few chapters. Oswald says, when we evaluate the validity of a definition, how many times have I told you sound, valid, and rational? So when you're going to check the validity, when you're going to see if it's valid, when we evaluate the validity of a definition, we must first ask whether it is broad enough to include all the items that manifestly share the majority of the common characteristics of the class being defined. In other words, is my definition of cat big enough to include everything that's a cat? Then we must ask whether the definition is narrow enough to exclude those items that only exhibit one or two common characteristics. Okay, you want to understand what he's talking about? You know what a cat is, and you know what a dog is. Tell me what a fox is. Those of you who have seen the fox in the wild know that he's half cat, half dog, literally. So what category do you put him in? Even his footprints, they don't look like cat or dog. So where do you put him? How do you define fox? He doesn't really fit into dog. He doesn't really fit into cat. And this is the problem that Oswald's pointing us to. So if we're going to make a definition of myth, it's got to be broad enough to include all those things we know as a myth, but it's got to be narrow enough to exclude those things that aren't myths. This is part and parcel of the problem. This very famous quote from one of our justices in the past. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. Well, not anymore. We don't. Our society no longer understands what pornography is. Say, well, Joe, that's when two people are having sex on camera. Oh, no, pornography is much more than that, boys and girls. This is what he's wrestling with. What is the essence of a definition? So, this is a major problem with the definitions of myth. Given the recent desire to break down any distinction between the Bible and the mythological, there has been a marked broadening of definitions. It is though we have defined an automobile as a vehicle having four wheels. Well, then a wagon's an automobile. See how this works? As far as it goes, the definition is accurate. Automobiles are vehicles with wheels. But it is not a helpful definition because it will include a lot of things that are clearly not automobiles, like wheelbarrows. If, however, we were to define automobile as self-propelled, gasoline-powered, four-wheeled passenger vehicle, the definition would be too narrow, because there are some automobiles that are powered with diesel fuel or electric, and some that have only three wheels, especially if you're in some Asian cultures, they have little three-wheeled cars. A second definition problem has to do with the very nature of the definition. Does the definition describe the items in the class, or does it evaluate them? We're going to come back to this in just a second. If we say that a legend is a false story about the past, while a history is a true account of the past, we involve ourselves in the question, false or true according to what standard. The definition includes an evaluation that may or may not be helpful in defining the members of the class. As we will see, this has been a continuing problem in the definition of myth. It's a continuing problem in definitions, period. Are you evaluating in your definition, or are you actually classifying? When I tell you form and function define, the form, what does it look, smell, taste like, its physical, whatever properties? Function, what does it do? The Greek wants to know about form. The Hebrew wants to know about function. Now, the Greek philosophers would include some function, and the Hebrews will include some form, but they focus mostly on that. I'm a 21st century philosopher. I want to know both, because I've learned over time that both define. So what's the form of the myth and what's its function? What's the form of history and what's its function? So a myth can be a story that's used to tell an ethos that congeals and supports and upholds a society. History, let's say the Bible is not myth, the Bible's history. It can tell things in a poetic form that does the same thing myth does. So how are they different? What's the difference between the myth and the poetic narration of history? This is a sticky wicket, folks. If you want to be a philosopher, you could spend the rest of your life on this question right alone. How do you define something? And it is not a distinction without a difference. As we've been on this show the whole time, the meaning behind the word you're using, the concept, the form and function of the idea behind your words is everything. If it is not known and understood by your audience, you're babble. You are spreading confusion. And if you know that you're doing this intentionally, well, now you're a chaos agent. And if you do it without checking to make sure you understand what the words mean, you are an unwitting chaos agent. What's the difference? If you're doing it intentionally, you're a murderer. If you're doing it unintentionally, it's either manslaughter or second-degree murder. Yeah, that's actually the difference in the law. Was it intentional or was it unintentional? And if it was unintentional, to what degree was it unintentional? If it was an accident, it could be manslaughter. If you knew what you were doing was dangerous and could harm somebody and you did it anyway, that's second-degree murder because it shows indifference to your actions. This is how we define these things. This is why some of you probably get bored with me doing it when I'm teaching something. We have a habit of going to the definitions. So at least you understand what I mean by the word while I'm using it. The goal is so that you don't misunderstand me. It's meant to serve you as well as myself in the argument I'm making, but it's meant to serve us both so that we are actually communicating and so that we are understanding each other in a common way and not imposing our wills and desires onto the conversation. This is what Oswald's pointing out to us and what we're having to deal with here now in defining a myth. So he's going to say the historical philosophical definitions. For our purposes, we may group the definitions of myth under two main headings according to their type. They are the historical philosophical and the phenomenological, like a phenomenon, or descriptive. They describe it. We may further subdivide the historical philosophical definitions into three groups: the etymological, the sociological, and the literary. Etymological, how the word evolves over time; sociological, how it's used in society; literary, how it's used in the written form. As the overall heading suggests, these latter three definitions all have in common the offering of a critical evaluation of the material they are describing. As mentioned above, the danger here is that the critical evaluation may import something into the definition that is in fact not inherent in the thing being defined. Perfect. Natasha will love this explanation. What do I mean? Okay. Dog, man's best friend. Cat, bring the ketchup. What are you talking about, Joe? Well, I just defined dog and cat for you. The dog is cuddly and cute and Nan's best friend, and I love dogs. Cats are annoying creatures that you just need to eat, like Alf. Bring the ketchup. Let's eat the kitty cat. Well, Joe, that might be Alf's definition, but Alf is evaluating it. Dog is pet, cat is food to Alf. That's what we're getting at. If you bring in something that is an evaluation, or in other words, your opinion into something. I see that. Get out, Alf. I knew I would set Natasha off with that because Natasha's got cats and she loves her cats. So this is what Oswald's trying to help us see. You can't bring your opinions into this, or your evaluations of whether there's something good or bad about the definition. Etymological definitions. Etymological definitions of myth stress the falsity of the thing being described. In other words, it has to be false. It's not real. Well, see, Joe, the Bible fits myth. Swing and a miss, as we will see as we continue. This derives from the meaning of the Greek word mythos. The Greeks used the word to describe a false legend of the gods. See, that doesn't fit what the Bible's telling you. It was a story that all the evidence showed did not take place. In other words, evidence shows you it didn't happen. We have evidence that supports biblical narrative. Thus, we have such a typical dictionary definition as, quote, a purely fictitious narrative usually involving supernatural persons, actions, or events, and embodying some popular idea concerning natural or historical phenomena, unquote. This is, of course, the definition known by the person on the street. In other words, this is the definition of myth most of y'all are aware of. If someone speaks to them of the myth of George Washington throwing a $50 across the Potomac, or chopping down a cherry tree, or the myth of the resurrection, they understand the speaker primarily to be making a judgment about the historical veracity of those reports. To call the Bible a myth in this sense is to say that it attempts to express the nature of reality, like those other ancient Near Eastern religions, are rooted in falsehood. See, the myth of the resurrection, the problem is that's not a myth. There are way too many historic records of witnesses to the resurrection, in and outside of the Bible. Yes, in and outside the Bible. That's what Oswald's going to be trying to help us see, is that you have to expand the definition of myth so great to include the Bible that it includes a whole bunch of other things that shouldn't be in there. Oswald continues. Another such definition says that myth is a story of the gods in which results of natural causes are accounted for supernaturally. Okay, we've got to stop here. I need to give you an etymological lesson on the word supernatural. Supernatural means nonsense. Both of them mean nonsense and supernatural are equivalent terms when they were originally coined. Supernatural means outside of your senses. The physical world, the world you can perceive with your senses, sight, touch, smell, feel, hear. That's the natural world. Anything else is supernatural. Nonsense means something you can't see, hear, smell, taste, or feel. Nonsense means supernatural. If it's nonsense, it's supernatural. If it's supernatural, it's nonsense. That's how these words were coined. They were coined in the process of the Enlightenment by materialists who were rejecting any idea of something that is knowable without the senses. So by calling something supernatural and nonsense, it has over time taken on the idea of laughability. That was the whole point of those words. It's a form of ad hominem. If you believe that something exists that you can't identify with your senses, then it's nonsense. That's just supernatural. Really? Okay. Show me, taste, feel, or anything, gravity. Well, Joe, all you got to do is jump up when you fall down. That's the effect of gravity. That's not gravity. Show me time. How do you sense time? See, I just proved to you there are things outside of your senses that you still perceive. You know they're real, but you're not using your five senses to perceive them, especially the time. What those words were done is they were coined specifically to attack the revelation idea of the Bible. And they're part and parcel of the history that leads to this idea that the Bible is just myth because it's supernatural. Well, that depends on how you define supernatural. And that's how they defined it, outside of your senses. But if what we think of as the spiritual world is part of creation, it's not supernatural. You just don't have the senses to, oh, wait a minute, maybe I do. You know that dark matter exists because your science and your observations prove it does. You know time exists because you can measure it, although you can't feel it, taste it, hear it, see it, or smell it. So you know that there are things that exist that when I start allowing that they may be dimensions that I can perceive without my five, maybe there's a sixth sense that you don't know about, or maybe these things exist beyond the visible perceptive realm. Then they're not supernatural. They're just outside of your perception. That doesn't, the idea of supernatural meaning it doesn't exist or it's magic, that was done intentionally. That was done by the secular humanists, science as their God, to destroy the religious belief system. What you have here in the words supernatural and nonsense are remnants of a political religious attack on the Western world. I can show you where this is true. Just go to etymology online and look up supernatural and nonsense. See how the words evolved over time. All right. Keep going. This is why I look at definitions, folks. Another such definition says that let's keep reading this to recap. Another such definition says that myth is a story of the gods in which results of natural causes are accounted for supernaturally. Obviously, such a definition makes the assumption that all events have nothing but natural causes. Thus, it becomes impossible to speak truthfully while ascribing an event to divine causation. But this need not be the case. If there is a divine first cause, then to ascribe events to his activity is not necessarily to speak falsely. The Greeks knew that there had to be an unmoved mover. So when you start investigating the ramifications of that, you're going to end up with if you go far enough, a transcendent God and the existence of the universe and things like that. And whoopsie, once you know that exists, he, she, it, that power, that entity, then this idea of supernatural goes bye-bye. The Greeks knew that. Greek philosophers knew that. This is why they made Socrates drink hemlock. And this is why Aristotle and Plato had to stay in their own little hole. And this is why after Aristotle and Plato died off, the students of Socrates, that line of thinking ended until the Bible came along. So to say God sent the rain does not deny all the meteorological causes and effects that go into rainfall, but it may be quite truthful in asserting that ultimately there was a distinct supernatural inception of guidance of a particular phenomena being described. This is what Charlie and I were just talking about a little while ago in the last half hour. The fact that all of the things we're teaching right now fell together at this point in time in such a way that they interlock and intersupport and describe each other, that it's brilliant. What we're going to be teaching for the next few months is brilliant, and we had nothing to do with it. We didn't plan it. And it has been in motion since I started this show. If you have not been a long-term listener, some of it you're not going to see. If you have been a long-term listener, I have spent 4 years laying the groundwork that you needed to understand what we're doing now. That's the supernatural hand of providence. The founding fathers would write about this all the time. They saw the hand of providence. We're going to finish this section. We'll call it quits for the day. So let's just keep going. Yet another etymological definition takes us one step further afield. This one holds that, quote, myth is a story involved in pre-scientific worldview, unquote. There is a hint of cultural arrogance in this point of view, in that it seems to say that it was impossible for a person with a pre-scientific worldview to speak truthfully about reality. Since they did not understand the mechanics by which the world operates, their insight about the meaning and destiny of life were necessarily false. Well, that's not true, and we know that's not true. So this definition is a faulty definition. It's not valid. C.S. Lewis illustrates the fallacy of such an argument in his imaginary story about the little girl and horrid red things. The little girl tells a visitor in her home that he must never drink from a certain bottle marked with a skull and crossbones because it will kill him. When he inquires why it will have this dire effect, she assures him that it is because the liquid inside contains horrid red things. Lewis then asks whether the visitor should not go ahead and drink the poison, since the little girl's faulty understanding of the nature of the poison obviously invalidates her report of its effects. Of course, the answer is no. She's understanding the poison on the level of a little girl, but that doesn't mean that she's wrong. The fact that the Hebrews may have shared with the Babylonians the idea that there were windows in the heavens through which, when they were opened, the rain poured, does not thereby mean that their report of Noah's involvement in the flood was necessarily fictional. The veracity of a narration cannot be prejudged on the basis of whether supernatural causation or pre-scientific worldviews are involved. It doesn't even work if scientific worldviews are involved. As I have pointed out to my friend of mine who's got a degree in electrical engineering, he does not know how that electron works. He has conceded that to me, that yes, they don't know how it works. It's why it's called electromagnetical theory, EMAG for short, when you're in engineering school. I took a couple of semesters of EMAG. The philosopher in me knows that you're only predicting how that electron works. And you're 99% of the time, maybe 99.9% of the time accurate with your prediction. But 0.1% of the time, that electron does something that you have no idea how or why it's doing it. And that causes glitches in your electronical equipment that you cannot explain, you cannot fix, you cannot find. Sometimes you just call them a gremlin. Oh, look, mythology, gremlins. No, what you're using is a story of a gremlin to describe a very real physical phenomenon. The electron is not doing what it should have been doing. Why? Because you don't really know how it works. So in your scientifically advanced world, you just came face to face with the fact that EMAG is mythology. What? Charlie, you're in the radios, right?
Yep.
Did I just tell a story, or was I being accurate?
Nope. Radios are FM. Oh, yeah. I can't we use that word on here, but yeah. M stands for magic. We won't say what the other one means.
Radios are fairy magic.
Yes, fairy magic. There you go.
So what I was just explaining is actually, that is the ultimate philosophical reality. We don't know exactly how. Yeah, that's true.
Can't tell you how many times that I've fixed computers or electronics by just touching them.
Well, tell me why it is on my FM radio when I was in the desert, I could talk to a guy over the horizon that I wasn't supposed to be able to talk to, but I couldn't talk to the dude I was looking at 200 yards away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's FM.
Fairy magic. Appreciate that, Charlie. Thank you. All right. So, a final example of these kinds of definitions describes myth as fanciful as opposed to philosophical or speculative thought. In other words, it's fanciful thought versus philosophical thought. Rather than functioning according to the Greek logic, it depends on free analogy. Pay attention, this is important. Thus, for the Egyptians, the sun crossed the sky in a boat. Why? Because humans crossed the Nile in a boat. But, by the same token, the sun is a falcon. Why? Because the falcon soars across the sky. So when they say the sun crosses in a boat and it is a falcon soaring across the sky, they're just trying to use whatever thoughts and language and understanding they have available to them to explain the observed phenomenon. They were not trying to describe it scientifically. That's a whole different conceptual structure. Science is a concept structure. The boat across the sky, the falcon flying across the sky, those are analogies. An analogy is a concept structure. It's a form of language. It conveys the idea that the sun travels across the sky. They're just trying to explain how. Well, they were wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a myth. It means you're trying to force that allegorical concept into your scientific concept. Well, no wonder it doesn't fit. And if you tried to force your scientific concept over their allegory, they'd probably burn you at the stake for being a heretic that obviously doesn't understand how the sun works. So Now comes the rub. The Greek thinker says, so the falcon crosses the sky in a boat. The myth maker is stunned. Why would you say such a silly thing? Of course the falcon does not cross the sky in a boat. The law of non-contradiction, which says that two things that equal the same thing must equal each other, is not applied. Not applied in the myth making. So if the Greek thinker says the falcon crosses the sky in a boat and you accept that, that's allegory. That's not necessarily false. But the myth maker says, well, that's crazy. The sun can cross the sky in the boat and fly across as a falcon, but they're not the same thing. What he's talking about here, the law of non-contradiction, I call that logical extension. That's just another shorthand. In other words, two things that are equal to each other. Transitive property. So Oswald continues. The assumption here is that the fanciful description is false, while the one that would describe the sun strictly in terms of naturalistic logic is true. That's an assumption. That's also an evaluation being read into the definition. Two comments needed to be made about the etymological definition of myth. First, it will not do to dismiss such meanings lightly as the territory of the unenlightened, as G.B. Caird seems to do. Since this has been and remains the generally held definition, the burden of proof continues to rest on those who say it is incorrect. So in other words, if I don't like that burden of myth, I have to give you a different, that definition of myth, etymological, I got to give you something different. That's what Oswald's doing. Furthermore, it is incumbent on them to explain why not only the Greeks, but the New Testament writers use the term in this way. Okay. What Oswald is doing here is setting up a formal argument. He's going to go over what is and why it's established this way. Then he's going to argue against it. Then he's going to, in later chapters, he's going to take possible objections that he's aware of, and he's going to handle those objections. So this is what it is. This is why I think it should be this way, my way. These are the objections you might have. Here's how I answer them. This is how you do philosophy. We are doing philosophy. Oswald's doing it. We're following along, and I'm helping to explain and fill in things and showing you where it sets off the fireflies in me and other aspects of the world. All of this ties back to your Bible. Finally, but a second point needs to be made regarding the etymological definition of myth, and that is that they are frequently too broad. To say that a myth is something false is one thing, but if one then limits the truth to sensuous fact or to natural causation or to mechanistic worldview, then we may well class as a myth false two things that may have in common only the idea of supernatural causation and nothing else. Well, okay, this is where we're going to be stopping. What was he talking about there at the end? The etymological definition of myth is so broad that, like I was saying, it's going to, technically, the etymological definition of myth cannot explain time or gravity. Can't. And it also can't explain logic or language or morality. What? Can you see morality? Well, yeah, if that guy murders something, no, you're not seeing morality. You're seeing the effects of immorality, but you're not seeing it. You're seeing an effect, the result of, but you're not seeing the morality, because the morality is a choice made by the individual within the individual's mind. Well, Joe, that's materialistic. That's the function of all the science. No, it isn't. Modern neurology, neurosciences tell us no, that we don't know how those thoughts are made. Got no idea. We think we do, but we don't. So you cannot see morality. Can you see logic? No, you can't. Can you see mathematics? No, you can't. Can you see language? No, you can't. Well, all of those things are nonsense. The laws, the mechanics, everything that governs them, the rules can you see the laws of physics? No, you can't. That's because all the things I just mentioned are transcendent. They exist outside of time and space, and they emanate from a transcendent creator, lawgiver. And you cannot explain them any other way that escapes the etymological definition of myth. So if I'm using an etymological definition of myth, philosophers are going to tell you, you just did away with your language, your math, your your logic, morality, all of that stuff, poof, gone, because it now becomes myth. Well, Joe, we know that math is real. It's not false. And the idea of myth was that it was false. Yeah, but the idea of being false was because it was based in nonsense and the supernatural, which is literally transcendent, is defined as supernatural nonsense. That's the whole concept of the idea. So etymological myth does not work, and the Bible does not fit it. Some of the things that we classify as myth don't fit the etymological definition of myth. Okay, that's where I want to stop for today. There's no way we're going to get through this whole chapter in one day. It would take me 3 hours to do it. My voice is just not going to do that. When we come back next Thursday, we'll pick up with sociological, theological definitions. We'll be at this for a while. This is important. And I think that the fact that we're going to be at it longer than just one chapter a week is actually going to help us. Because like Deltaros was saying, by the time we get to the end of the book, this stuff is going to be clicking. It's going to take a little while, little bites, let you digest it and think about it, chew on it, noodle on it. And it'll grow class over class. And what we're going to be doing on Tuesdays and what we're going to be doing on probably Friday will also help with this. And then some of our Wednesday classes as well will probably help with this a great deal. So we'll go that way. And we'll just continue. If there's nothing else on the board that we need to address or deal with, we will sign off. We thank you for being here. We hope that this is actually going to help you, that it'll build your understanding of the world around you, that it'll help you finally concretely understand why the majority of people think one way and a small group of people think another. And the sociologist in me will tell you that it tends to be about 10% of the population that thinks this way and 90% that thinks the other way. That's a biblical principle. 1/10 part. I wonder where that came from. That's not provable. That's a myth, Joe, except that it reflects in a lot of the sociological and psychological studies I've done. So we will make these connections as we go through, and you're open to asking questions. If you have any that come up in between now and the next class, email them or save them and ask them on the board, or you can call in to discuss this anytime you want. This is a class that is open to phone calls. Your
Or you
feedback
can
is
ask them in
important
the
to us.
Signal chat.
Yes, in the Signal chat. I've actually been able to keep up with that, at least as of lately. So you're going to get as much out of this as you put into it. This is a partnership. You'll get out of it what you put into it. So we love you. We thank you for being here. If we're doing something that you like or you think is cool, hit the like buttons, hit the share buttons, do all of that good stuff. But until the next time we see each other, tomorrow we finish Dr. Heiser's Unseen Realm and we set the table for the next book. So whether we see you tomorrow or we see you Monday when I talk more about Trump and what's going on in Minnesota and the dangers, and I'm also going to bring some things to you. I'm going to post them on the Road to Concord blog page and Facebook page, the Road to Concord. I'm going to share with you what some of our people in New Zealand and in Australia are watching us, what they're seeing here in the United States. Hint, spoiler, they think we're in a revolution. They think we're a civil war. They think we're in a second American Civil War. And it's well-reasoned. And it comes from one of their news stations down there, one of their news sources. So I'll be posting that later today in the blog page and on the Facebook page. Let me put the blog post up, and then I'll share the blog post on Facebook. We'll be talking about that Monday. So whether we see you tomorrow or Monday, y'all stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye. We love you.